Hello, good evening, everybody. And Mr. James, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing good. Let me turn my camera on here. Hang on one second. Okay. Um, all right. It is so nice to meet you. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. It's nice to meet you as well. Well, in person, obviously.
Yeah. Awesome. So James, you are running for Tennessee's U.S. Senate seat, is that right?
Yes. I'll be running to reallocate, I guess you could say, Bill Hagerty's current seat in the U.S. Senate.
Okay. And can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what made you want to run for Senate?
Sure. Yeah. So again, my name is James Macon. That's Macon. I'm a 22-year resident of the state of Tennessee. I'm originally from Illinois. I actually work in the medical device industry. I'm a finance, operations, and procurement expert. I've spent 25 years in that industry, and I was formerly a journalist for CNN, where I also covered Capitol Hill as a journalist. And then why am I running? So I'm running for several reasons. One is because the country is becoming unaffordable in a lot of ways. If you think about our parents and our grandparents, we were in a country that was really, like, from a financial standpoint, was set up for one income to be able to support a family of four. Today, there's a lot of people who have two incomes and they can barely support a family of three, right? And so minimum wage is not keeping up with the cost of inflation. We have a terrible tariff system that's going on. Public safety is obviously an issue. Education, we're falling behind other countries that are similar developed countries. Our healthcare system is obviously extremely expensive and is almost pricing out a lot of elderly people and children in some cases as well. So those are some of the reasons why I decided to run.
Okay, perfect. And for those of us that are joining us for the first time tonight, just a little bit about what our vote counts is. We're a nonpartisan coalition of citizens from diverse states and backgrounds. We're united by a shared commitment to empowering voters and promoting candidates who stand for integrity, inclusion, and accountability in upcoming elections. We're formed by a collective of educators, veterans, small business owners, students, and community advocates. Our vote counts represents the strength of unity across geography, race, and ideology. While our stories are different, our mission is the same. That's to ensure that every voice is heard and every vote truly counts. Our vote counts is more than a name. We are a promise, a movement, and a rallying cry for democracy. So together we are hoping to shape the future one informed vote at a time. Now, you said your last name was pronounced Macon, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Macon.
Yeah, just like Macon,
Okay.
Georgia.
Yes, Mr. Macon. So we've been hearing a lot of things about Tennessee in the news the past couple of days, and um, I guess as of today, the Republicans in the Tennessee House have passed a new or approved a new map that's gerrymandered the primarily a black district, and essentially weakening that vote in that area. Can you kind of like give me a little more information? Do you know any more about what maybe the next steps are, or what can we expect moving forward?
Yeah. So a couple things. So yes, so there's a movement going on across the country. It obviously started in Louisiana, which they're still disputing today, related to the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which essentially there were several provisions in that act. One of the provisions was that were controls around gerrymandering or restructuring or redistricting maps related to congressional elections. So, as you know, for Congress, there's each state has multiple districts. In this case, in the case of Tennessee, we're talking about District 9, which is the district that consumes all of Memphis and then goes a little bit north of Memphis. And so, with that being said, the process has been, or what's happening today in the country is that they have removed the restriction on gerrymandering or on redistricting. In most cases, they were able to redistrict or restructure maps every 10 years. Today, they're actually just going to basically do it midstream based upon the vote of the state legislature. And so as it relates to Tennessee, eventually with the new map, Memphis will be carved into three separate districts that are connected to other districts flowing from east to west. So whereas before District 9 kind of traveled north from Memphis up, it's now been divided into three parts where one part of Memphis will be a part of a kind of east to west district, and then another, and then another. It's like kind of three slices, which will ultimately take the voter base in Memphis and then make it a minority voter base connected to a larger, historically Republican voting now district or territories. So what that does is, again, I'm an independent, so I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. But my issue with gerrymandering just in general, and again, keep in mind that Republicans aren't the only people who gerrymander. Democrats gerrymander too, right? So whoever has the majority has typically tried to utilize the gerrymandering that strategy. But as it relates to Tennessee, District 9 is the only Democratic district today in the state of Tennessee. So we talk about like the United States as a country and talk about democracy. One of the great things about democracy is diversity of thought. And when you take a state like Tennessee, that's a very influential state. If you got multiple major cities in Tennessee, sports, culture, music, education, it's really limiting, and also it really destroys the voice of many people when you like take this kind of isolated community that has in some ways very different values, very different voting habits, and then you basically eliminate their ability to kind of stand alone and to speak up for their needs and the kind of unique policies and programs that they're putting in place for their particular constituency. So again, it is a power play, but again, Republicans kind of control the whole map in Tennessee to take over even the last Democratic stronghold in the entire state. Again, I get the strategic impact, but as it relates to like pure democracy, it's a bit of a power play.
Gotcha. Yeah, it was a little disheartening to see, and I'm hoping that the people kind of stand up. I know they've been protesting, so hopefully this encourages more people to wake up to what's happening and can get out and go vote. And when are your primaries?
So for me, obviously, since I won't be in the primary as an independent, the actual election is November 3rd. I believe the primary starts in late September, but again, I won't be a part of the primary process due to the fact that I'm an independent.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. That is fair. Just an icebreaker question too, before we get into some of the policy questions. What's a hobby you've had to put on the back burner since running your campaign?
Well, honestly, I don't put any hobbies on the back burner. For me, I think that connecting with people, whether it be, I'm very involved in athletics. Most of my biggest hobby is chasing my daughter around. She's in a robotics team, and she's a tennis player, and she's an artist. So a lot of my time is kind of spent, kind of following her around and making sure she's got what she needs. But it's a good opportunity. It's a good opportunity to meet with the parents. It's a good opportunity to meet with administrators in the schools and to kind of talk to people about kind of what I'm doing and what their views are and what their needs are. And just to listen to hear, why people are upset or why people feel a certain way or why they support the gerrymander or whether they are against the gerrymander, right? So all the things that I do on a daily basis really are the foundation to how I connect and interact with the people of Tennessee. So I don't really put any of it on the back burner.
Okay, well, awesome. I'm glad you haven't had to do that. So our first set of questions are surrounding agriculture. Recent reports from Successful Farming shows Tennessee row crop farmers lost hundreds of millions over the past 2 years to drought, high input costs, tariffs, and lower commodity prices. What is your immediate plan to help family farms stay financially alive?
Yes, there's a couple things. So first thing we have to address the tariff situation. That is has a big impact on not just farmers, but the cost of living as a whole across the entire United States, which is driving up inflation and making in some situations making situations unlivable for people just because of the lack of affordability. The other thing is that what people don't realize. So my grandfather was a farmer. He's from Bolivar, Tennessee. So I come from farming family. My other grandfather was a farmer in Tams, Illinois, in southern Illinois. So this kind of is very close to heart for me. So we think about two ways. The first thing is the tariff impact. So tariffs drive up costs of a lot of things. All the feeder products, seeds, equipment, and then also inadvertently drives up the cost of labor. The other thing that actually impacts farmers in Tennessee is actually immigration policy. And I know we don't like to talk about that because that's one of those hot button topics. But we have to think about the fact that in the state of Tennessee, we have a large community of migrant farm workers, and having access to that skilled migrant labor. And I want to reinforce the word skilled because everybody thinks they could just go out in the fields and do farm work. If you didn't grow up doing farm work, trust me, it is not for the faint of heart. And to do efficient farm work is really not for the faint of heart. And so we have to have a skilled workforce and an affordable workforce. But at the same time, we also have to have a fair and equitable subsidy system. Today, subsidies are being cut. They've been cut for the last 2 years under the Trump administration. In addition to that, when we talk about subsidies, that there's disparity in the distribution of subsidies. A lot of times, Black farmers have actually been kind of phased out or not been equally given equal access to subsidies. So we have a lot of farmer foreclosures that are the result of raising higher costs, tariffs, inflation, and in addition to that, we've had a couple of difficult yield years due to drought and due to other external circumstances, including some of the storm patterns. With now that the tornado alley is moving further east, so obviously it used to be further west, and now you start seeing more tornadoes in Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Kentucky, and even in Illinois. So as a result, we have to have those things in place. So one is going to be reducing the tariffs. Number two is going to be equal and fair distribution of subsidies and increasing the subsidy access for all farmers. And then number three is better emergency response. Because right now, obviously, with some of the cuts that have happened across the federal government, FEMA is kind of like not a very helpful organization at this point, not well organized, also not well funded. So when we do have disasters in terms of natural disasters that do directly impact farmers, the response timeliness and the response effectiveness has been, in a lot of cases, null and void. And so those are the things that I would do to prioritize the well-being and the welfare of farmers.
Okay, very good. So a follow-up question for that. How should Tennessee respond when farmers are facing the rising fertilizer, fuel, seed, and equipment costs all at once?
Yeah, no, it's a great. So there's a couple things. So one thing that farmers don't have access to, and a lot of countries do. So I was actually just reading about what's going on in Burkina Faso, where the federal government is actually helping farmers to get access to heavy equipment, right? So think about like some of the heavy equipment that's used in farms can be hundreds of thousands up into millions of dollars, especially if you have a large territory to farm or a large amount of land. What we don't have any what we call like a GPO. I work in procurement, so we have GPOs, or group purchasing organizations, where corporations take advantage of their joint buying power to buy things that are very expensive. So think about like capital equipment and things like that. Whereas farmers, we have like if you think about like the what was it called, the healthcare, the exchange, where people could go out and get healthcare using the government's buying power to reduce the cost of healthcare for individuals. So you go out to the exchange, they could get a little bit of a lower rate because they're using the collective buying power of all the other people and the federal government. We could do something like that for farmers, where we could create a GPO, a group purchasing organization under the federal government, which would allow us to utilize the full power of the federal government to reduce the cost, reduce the purchasing cost of heavy equipment, and also things like seed. But there's also one other thing that I want to mention, and for sake of time, is that we also have an issue with genetically modified seeds that are self-terminating, and that creates a problem too, because our farmers now have to buy new seed every single year. Whereas, in real life, obviously, a lot of plants germinate and they can can survive on one seed for multiple seasons from one plant. But today, the seeds are self-terminating, so they have to buy new seed every year. And because these companies control, they kind of monopolize the seed industry, they are charging higher rates for seeds, even to expand and to grow their own bottom line profits. And that's also being supported because a lot of these corporate entities are funding the candidates that you guys vote for every year. And so they can't shut down Monsanto and Pioneer and these other companies that are creating these self-terminating seeds because they're the people who are funding their campaigns. So if to kind of answer that question is that we have to make it cheaper, create government-run GPOs that allow farmers to collectively buy with the buying power of the federal government to reduce their costs. And then secondarily, we have to eliminate self-terminating seeds.
Good answers, honestly. Okay. What specific reforms would you support to keep independent family farms from disappearing?
Yeah. So I think that we have the same thing where we have with mortgages, right? So we have foreclosure prevention programs in the federal government to help people who are struggling to pay their mortgage. So you have in some cases they have, I forgot what's called it, where you can kind of extend and make a payment later. I forgot maybe a forbearance, I think it's what they call it. We have those programs for both student loans and we have those for mortgages and funded and supported by the federal government through Sallie Mae and through Fannie Mae and through Fannie Mac and other entities. I know we do have some of those programs today for residential farms. So residential farming, because obviously the farm is tied to a mortgage. So they do kind of grandfather into some of those programs. But if you're getting to the larger scale and you are maybe not a corporate farm, but you are an incorporated farm, so you're like a mid-sized farming organization or mid-sized farming infrastructure, you would probably phase out, or maybe you would cost out of those mortgage-based support programs. And so we need something kind of in that mid-tier to support farmers who are successful enough to have larger amounts of land. They're not corporations and they're not, kind of a mom and pop operation. They're somewhere in between to prevent that type of those types of foreclosures. The other thing that we have is that there's a lot of entities and interests within our corporate and governmental system that support importing food from other places because their businesses are structured that way. So you think about companies like Dole, which have the majority of their actual land infrastrucures in other countries. So they love the idea of us importing large amounts of our food from other countries because although they're American companies, the food that they control is coming from South America or from Central America, right? And so there's this market-driven kind of push for us to import more food. But a state like Tennessee, because of the fertility of the land and the different altitudes that Tennessee exists in, we can actually manufacture or we can grow almost all of our own food in Tennessee. We literally are a state that could be self-sustainable, similar to California. California could technically grow all of its own food because of the size and the amount of agricultural land they have. In Tennessee, we are very similar. So we wouldn't have the amount of food diversity, but in terms of just pure mechanics, we could actually grow our own food in Tennessee and be self-sufficient in that regard. Just again, we wouldn't have the amount of diversity of foods, but we would be able to sustain our population. And so yes, I do think that that should be a primary point, that we should be looking at ways that we can maintain our own food growing industries here. But the core point where we need to show support is in that kind of mid-tier farmers who are not corporate and who are not mom and pops, but sit right there in that kind of middle line, because that's where we're seeing the majority of the foreclosures.
Gotcha. Okay. So another question just about, expanding access to just the Tennessee farmers being able to get crops to the market. What role, if any, should the government play in expanding broadband access for rural farming communities?
Yeah, so I think about broadband as like a utility, right? So I know like in today's world, we put IT and telecom together. So normally you see like IT and telecom lumped together. It's become not part of infrastructure because when you lump with IT, it becomes almost like an ancillary thing, like technology or enhancement, where it should be a part of core infrastructure. Internet access in today's world is a core component of human survival. Like, you know, but again, it's not looked at that way. Even when you look at how things are categorized, like across, like from a procurement standpoint, across categories, they usually will put IT and telecom together. But telecom is a utility, and it should be treated like all other utilities. So if we have access to fresh water, if we have access to electricity, if we have access to natural gas, we should also have access to internet service, and that should be a part of foundational and fundamental budgeting. Today it is not, but it should be. And also, like other industries, we think about when electricity became a utility, it started off as being unregulated, then became regulated, and then now it's generally in most cases unregulated again. Some states are regulated, like Tennessee in some cases is regulated through the Tennessee Valley Association, but the same way with utility, there may be, the same way with telecom, that in some cases, as it relates to internet, that maybe broadband should be partially regulated in order to create widespread accessibility, and then maybe deregulated after, like similar to what we've done with other things like telephone and some of the other technologies. But I think that that's something we should look into definitely, because there's no reason why anybody today should be disconnected from the grid, as you say. When it's one of the cheapest industries to stand up. It's much cheaper to stand up than natural gas, where you have pipelines and other things that have to exist. And again, it should be a right, not a privilege.
Okay, perfect. So just kind of talking on environmental things, we know there's a lot of environmental damage going on everywhere. But in Tennessee, according to WPLN News, there was a map released in January 2026 that showed about 19,000 miles of Tennessee waterways that are impaired by pollution and environmental damage, some including E. coli contamination, pesticides, erosion, PFAs, the forever chemicals, habitat destruction. So what specific steps would you support for to protect Tennessee drinking water, first of all, and the rivers from agricultural runoff, all these things, just the contamination of PFAs and everything? What are some of your ideas to kind of protect against those kind of environmental damages?
So the first thing is that one of the problems that we have is that a lot of when we talk about environmental impacts, we rely too heavily on the EPA, right? And we put a lot of the regulation and the management in the hands of the federal government. I think as a state, we need to have much stronger environmental controls for our own state that in some cases supersede or even go beyond what the EPA requirements are. Like as a state, we are a regulator as well. And it's just like, if you think about like the CDC, right? So if there's an epidemic or a pandemic, people rely heavily on the CDC for guidance and for feedback and for processes and process controls. That's all fine and dandy, and that's great. But in terms of speed of deployment and the ability to react quickly to a threat, it works a lot better if you have strong controls within your own state and they have a well-funded infrastructure within your own state. Now, again, no, this is a situation where we're talking about budget, and the state budget is a point of high contention. And but we got to remember that for the last 4 years, Tennessee has run a surplus from a budget standpoint. So, and again, there's some nuance to that, like why we have a surplus. A lot of it has to do with COVID and some funding that we received from federal government related to COVID. But what I'm saying is that we have an opportunity that we can bring this into our own hands. I've seen it firsthand here in Tennessee with Elon Musk and the Grok data center, which is basically being run with these propane generators that are creating a lot of pollution, creating a lot of noise pollution in addition to the physical pollution. And the feedback from local and state government is, well, they met all the EPA requirements, and so it's a business decision at this point. Well, human health should never be a business decision. That's the whole point of government, is to provide oversight, to provide checks and balances, right? To provide regulatory control and regulatory process. And so if we fail to do that, we're failing to do our job as not politicians, but as public servants. And so that's kind of where I stand on that. I think that we should look at developing and strengthening regulatory controls within our own state, and using the federal government for guidance and for additional support. But we should own it here on the ground in Tennessee.
Perfect. If anyone in the audience, if you would like to ask Mr. Macon a question, you can request up or put your comment in the chat, and then I'll read it out. So either way is cool. No one's in the queue right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and move over to education.
Okay.
So from Ballotpedia, recent reporting has focused on affordability concerns and unequal funding between institutions. So Tennessee families continue struggling with rising tuition, housing, and student debt despite programs like Tennessee Promise. Colleges are also warning about funding pressures and enrollment gaps. So do you believe that Tennessee Promise has gone far enough, or are students still being priced out of higher education?
Yeah, I think there's two things there, right? So when we say being priced out, like in terms of the barriers to entry, I don't know that I think the cost of education, first of all, the escalating cost of education is crazy. It's the highest in terms of all the industry sectors for like all the different things that you can spend money on, right? So if you think about like entertainment industry, you think about pharmaceutical industry, you think about medical device industry, automotive industry. The fastest growing industry in the country is education, university education. So I'm talking about secondary, college education. College education is gone crazy. Like it is a super fast growing sector in our economy, and I don't fully understand why. Why it's so expensive, but it is. And so it's a couple things. So the first is, does the cost of education create barriers to entry? Yes, it does create barriers to entry, especially for middle class people, because if you're low income, there's more programs. I mean, you have grant programs, you have scholarship programs that are need based. If you're middle class, a lot of times you don't kind of fit into that, which is one of the reasons why there's this whole like divide in Tennessee among middle class voters and lower income voters, because there's these gaps where you're like, if you're like right on the threshold of being middle class, where you actually are in a worse economic situation than somebody who would be considered to be low income, and because you're not that mid-high middle class, and you're not obviously in the higher income area. So if you're like low middle class and you have a family, you're actually going to struggle a lot more because the programs don't exist. You're exempt from those lower income programs, but you're just basically on that perimeter or right on the periphery. And so that's where you get a lot of white conservatives who are really up in arms and really angry. And people are saying, well, why are they angry? They're middle class. And it's like, yeah, they're middle class, but if you're a middle class person with 3 or 4 kids and you live in the suburbs, your cost of living is going to be extremely high. And in comparison, you're not going to be eligible for a lot of the programs. So you're not going to get relief for utilities. You're not going to get, be eligible for some of the need-based scholarships and need-based grants. And so that's where we hear like a lot of that angst, because there's a lot of people in Tennessee. There's a really large body of people who fit into that, who fall into that space, right? And that's across race. That's Black, white, Hispanic, Asian. It manifests across race. And so that's where we're hearing like the largest outcry and the kind of the most vehement objection to the way the system is structured today. And so I want to address that, because if we're an aspirational culture in the United States, so most people are aspiring to be in the middle class, and then obviously a lot of middle class people are aspiring to be in the upper income area. But if
we have poor people in some of our urban and rural and suburban communities who are aspiring to fall middle class. When they get there, they're like, wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be, because a lot of things I thought would be more affordable because I'm middle class are become less affordable because I'm not eligible for any of the helpful programs that exist within the state or within the federal government. So now let's talk about solutions. So we talk about, first thing about education. There's two things. One is that student loans are not inherently an evil, but the problem is that if you look at all the majors across for university education, so I'm a University of Tennessee graduate, Rocky Top Vol. But when I graduated with an MBA from Tennessee. So I had a business degree. I went out into business. There were lots of jobs available. So I made a good living. Being in the right major at the right time helped, But there are a lot of majors in school that when you graduate and you've got student loans or other types of debt, credit card debt, whatever, that they don't, the return on investment is not high enough. And I don't think people are being properly prepared for that. That I know, like, we want to follow our passions, but I think that, like, a lot of passion majors should be minors, just be totally frank. And that majors should be tied to economic opportunity and economic access, so that when people graduate, they are graduating in fields that will support the ability for them to want to be able to pay back student loans if they exist. And secondarily, to be able to actually start on a solid footing into a real life. The other thing is that we have a lot of people who start college and don't finish. And so imagine starting college, you go for a year, 2 or 3 years, you've built up the student loans, but you don't have the higher income because you didn't finish the degree. And there's nothing for those people. And that is a large group. When we started college, we had a orientation. They said, look to your left and to your right. Most of the people that you see today will not be here on graduation day. And I'll tell you, they were absolutely right. Probably about 80% of the people I started college with did not graduate. So they got the loans, they incurred the credit card debt, and now they're back into the world, and they're eligible for minimum wage or just above minimum wage pay. And that's another thing that, again, we don't talk about in the media, we don't talk about in political circles, but what happens to them? Where's the safety net for those people who don't finish college? And then the third thing is that for those people who started college and have some college, transitioning them into trade programs would be a great opportunity for us as a state, but we don't do it. So you got 3 years of college. You basically completed all of your basic curriculum, and there's nothing that says, hey, you know what? I know you're not going to finish, but we've got this. You may not be an electrical engineer, but we have an electrician program. And here's the thing: in Tennessee, an electrician can make as much as an electrical engineer. Like, you didn't finish that mechanical engineering program, but we have this diesel mechanic program, this trade program, and guess what? A diesel mechanic can make as much as a mechanical engineer in Tennessee. But we don't connect the things. We don't connect people back to the opportunities, because we look at it like, and this is just a kind of American thing. It's a competitive environment. We're economically driven, that we don't have support networks for people who may fail. Like, your primary objective was X, you didn't meet that, so you failed, and now you got to figure it out. But I'm saying that just because you failed at this doesn't mean you cannot succeed at that. And the disconnect is often that just because you don't get the university degree does not mean you cannot make the same income through a trade program, and in some cases even better income. We have not connected the two things, and I think that's a big opportunity. And I think that's where we can actually make things better.
Oh, I was on mute. Sorry about that. Yeah. We did have one question earlier in the chat, and then Miss Ayana came up because she wants to ask you a question as well.
Yeah.
Someone asked, what do you consider as a passion major? So, like, something probably not useful in the workplace, or like, what do you consider?
I think everything is useful. Like, everything, everything that we learn in life helps us to be successful in some area, right? But let's say, for example, there's some schools that have majors like within literature department, you can major in poetry, right? Now, I love poetry, love it, but let's be honest, right? In the state of Tennessee, can you, create a lucrative and a beneficial working income as a poet? Maybe you can, right? But but the likelihood, right, is could be relatively low, right? And so now, if you're a poetry major and you're also you're also an education major in English, right? Your mastery of poetry could be very beneficial to your classes you're teaching and as an educational tool. Or if you're a writer, right, and you're a published writer and you have an understanding and a knowledge of poetry, that could be very beneficial to the way you write and to your style, right? So there's benefits that, if you're a marketer, having a background in poetry could make you a better marketer because of the way you write pitches and jingles and slogans, right? So so it's not that the major is bad or that having that education is not valuable. It is valuable, but it has to be packaged in some type of an economically beneficial structure so that you can actually turn it into income so that you can support your family or support yourself and be able to have a comfortable life to some degree.
That's fair. Okay. Hey, Ayana, you wanted to ask a question?
Joni, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. James Macon. How are
Hi,
you?
Yana, how you doing?
I am doing well. I've been talking about Tennessee a lot lately. It's been in the news. I don't know if you two have talked about healthcare yet. Have you talked about that?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, Tennessee has some of the highest hospital closure rates in the country. And I would like to know, what federal policies are you going to champion to keep the hospitals open and to make sure that healthcare access is equitable and people aren't having to drive like an hour to get even emergency healthcare, but just routine, diagnostic testing like x-rays and stuff?
Yes, this is a really good, and this is a super hot seat question because we deal in an era where we're talking about private hospitals, right? So they have the right to open or close, where they want, and also statistically, the majority of hospitals that are closing are rural hospitals, right? And so there's some real human geographical reasons why that exists. One is that there's a lot of flight out of rural communities into urban and suburban communities. So populations are declining in a lot of rural communities, which when you look at like a ROI, if you're a hospital administrator, you look at the ROI and you're saying, yeah, I've got this network of 100 hospitals. This particular hospital is my lowest, it's generating the lowest ROI, or it's got the lowest economic viability. And, so they look at the spreadsheet and they say, let's eliminate that one and we can maximize our profitability across the rest of the network. So it's very much a financial decision in most cases. And again, I understand from your standpoint, you're saying, well, what about those people? Like, because a lot of times we talk about corporations, the financial decision is not always the altruistic or the humanitarian decision. So then the question becomes, then what does the federal government do, or what does the state government do to subsidize these hospitals? That's a tricky one. And one of the reasons why it's tricky is that that a lot of times privately owned companies don't want the government involved in their business activities. So there's a lot of pushback from private. And I work in the medical industry, so I'm saying this as an insider, that there's a lot of pushback that these hospitals don't want the government, whether federal, local, or state, involved in their business activities. The second thing is that it's extremely costly. So, like, how do you, in an efficient way, use public resources and public funding to support a private hospital institution? So here's where we how we address it. So the first thing is that there's two kind of questions about this. One is that instead of having a full service hospital, should we have more like clinical or clinician based medical services in these smaller rural communities? The pushback to that is that if I have a critical disease state like cancer or leukemia or heart disease, they may not have the resource and the proper equipment to service my needs if we go into a clinician or clinical structure versus a hospital structure. Then the other question is, do we subsidize hospitals, or do we build kind of state-owned hospitals? We've had those in the 70s and 60s. If you all remember, I'm from East St. Louis. We had, the state-run hospital.
I remember.
Kind of scary, I'm just.
I mean, but yeah, they were for a different purpose. But listen, Mr. Macon, listen. People are doing a lot of things that are in their business interests that are perfectly legal, constitutional. but they are immoral AF.
Yeah, I agree.
And
Totally
people
agree.
are suffering. And I don't want the government to be legislating morals, right?
Yeah.
But
But I do
the
have a solution.
federal government has to invest in its citizenry. And that starts with our health care, our
But I have a
access
solution
to
for you.
health care.
I have a solution for you though.
Okay,
Here's,
go ahead.
here's my
I'm
solution.
waiting.
Here's my solution. I went around the block just because I want to make sure people
You did. You was
understand
running
under
a
the
marathon
context.
around that block, honey.
Right. But let me bring it back home for you. There is a way that we can actually create a win-win scenario in this environment. Here's the way: university hospitals. Now, hear me out. So we've got UT, Vanderbilt, University. We don't have University of Memphis, but we do have UT, and we have Vanderbilt University Hospital systems. Right. We have obviously have UT Medical Center here in Tennessee, and also obviously in Knoxville, and then we have UT hospitals throughout the state, and also Vanderbilt. Because these are research hospitals, which we're training doctors, we are training nurses through the university system. There's a benefit from an educational standpoint in actually expanding the reach of the university systems. University systems are by nature publicly funded institutions. They are regulated, and they benefit from the education standpoint. Conversation that we were having before about reducing the cost of education, because there are mixed not-profit and for-profit institutions, because obviously you're charging people for services, you're gaining revenue through the services that you're providing, but also you're subsidized by the state and in some cases the federal government, as being a land grant university. It kind of creates the best of both worlds, where you can expand into rural communities, you are improving education, you are improving access, as particularly to underrepresented groups and minorities. And at the same time, you can provide the quality healthcare services to these rural communities, and in some cases remote communities, without going into a clinician based or a clinic based structure. So, what would you think about something like that?
I like that idea. I live in the Cleveland, Ohio area, and we do have a university hospital partially based system, but we also obviously you have the Ohio State hospital system. And when I lived in Michigan, there was the University of Michigan hospital system. And so that helps. I'm not sure how I'm not sure if rural areas though have the infrastructure to support that, is my concern,
Yeah.
right?
And I think right now what we do is, like, we kind of have this, with the corporate structure, there's a lot of building by template. So like, I give you an example, right? So if you, like, right now in Chicago, Walgreens is pulling their stores out of Chicago. I don't know if you saw the news about it, but Walgreens is pulling their stores out of Chicago. And so a lot of Chicago communities are upset because Walgreens is pulling their stores out. And the reason why is because of, theft and pilferage data or whatever. But one of the reasons why it doesn't work, why there's a disconnect between the community and the corporation, similar to what we deal with in healthcare, is because hospital systems build, in a lot of cases, kind of a cookie cutter approach. They kind of build hospitals a certain way for all communities. Just because we're talking about a hospital versus a clinic versus what they call like the minor medical structure, it doesn't mean that a hospital has to always look and be structured the same in terms of like minimum number of beds, minimal number of facilities. I think that and this is again one of the reasons why I like the university system. And we see the university hospitals actually thrive in every aspect. I mean, the university hospitals are doing better than all the hospitals right now, right?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is because they don't build, they're not corporations, so they don't build like a cookie cutter approach. They actually build systems that reflect the needs of the community. So if I'm in a community where I know that that there's a high occurrence of diabetes, I built the hospital with diabetes in mind, or I built a hospital with heart disease in mind, because that is the primary disease state of that community. And I can build smaller hospitals that are they're a little bit bigger than a clinic, and they have overnight, and multi-day, beds that can house a person for multiple days, weeks, or even in some cases, I wouldn't say years, because that's where we get into the assisted living situation, but extended periods of time. But they're smaller, they're a little bit more niche, they're a little bit more boutique. And that's something that we actually see, that there are hospitals like that. Like I think about, in the area that I grew up in, that that there were, I was Barnes Jewish. So Barnes has these kind of satellite hospitals throughout St. Louis that are, they're smaller and they're a little bit more niche, but at the same time, they provide the services that are needed for the communities in which they exist, and they're not cookie cutter across the board. So I think that that's an opportunity that we have to maybe build smaller footprint hospitals in these rural communities that still can meet the ROI requirements, but at the same time not have as quite as much infrastructure.
I agree with you. Wow. Okay. I agree with a politician or a political
I'm not a
figure.
politician, by the way. I'm not a
Political
politician.
figure.
I'm a public
Excuse me.
servant. I'm a public servant. I'm not
I
a
agree
politician.
with you. That's how
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
done in Northeast Ohio. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
so much. I love the question. This is a great dialogue. I appreciate it.
Of course, no problem. Thank you, Joni.
Thank you. See you later. Okay, and then there was one more question in the chat. What committees would you like to be on once in Senate?
Yeah, that's a good question. Who are we? Well, two things, right? Strategically, I need to not answer the question because one, because I'm not Democrat or Republican. Obviously, they control who can be added to different committees, and it's a very competitive race, even within their parties, of who gets placed where. And tipping my hat to tell them which ones I would be trying to get on could actually prevent me from being able to get on them. So I got to be a little bit strategic about that. I will tell you what I'm passionate about, and then you can fill in the blanks for yourself if that makes sense. So
Okay.
one thing is financial discipline. I have a plan actually to eliminate the federal budget deficit, and I grew up in the Clinton administration where we hit zero budget. We zeroed out the budget deficit, and we're in a very good place from a budgeting standpoint as a federal government. I have a plan to actually get us back there. So when we talk about the kind of the financial health of the country, that's something I'm extremely passionate about because it opens up doors to do other things. We talk about the programs not being funded and programs being cut, but we're paying $1 trillion in interest every year on our debt. $1 trillion in interest payments. Let me say it again. $1 trillion in interest, right? $1 trillion actually would eliminate homelessness across the entire country. $1 trillion a year just focused on homelessness could eliminate homelessness across the whole country. You're right. And you should have enough change to make sure that there are no children in the country who are food deprived or who are nutritionally deprived, just with $1 trillion. So that's how big that is, just what we're paying in interest. So if we eliminate that, we can put a lot of programs back in place instead of paying interest to some internal institutions, but also some international institutions, including many institutions in China, who we claim to be competing with head to head, but we're also funding their development and growth.
Okay, yeah. So we were on, before we had a few questions, I know we were on education. And we were talking about the Tennessee Promise. So, and you had mentioned, of course, that the middle class often gets kind of left out of the lower income opportunities, but also they don't have enough money to pay for college. And I grew up in a household like that too, so I'm very familiar with that. And my dad telling me that he would not co-sign for loans, and so. What kind of ideas do you have to kind of help those working class families to afford college? Even because if they can't afford college, even with scholarships, what other things should we do to make college more affordable?
Yeah, so there's a couple things and again, this because there's what can the government do for me, and there's also what can I do for myself, and what can I do for the country, right? So let's just kind of look at it three ways, right? What can the government do? Well, the first thing is that that there should be right now, if you we need a scholarship, right? You'd have to apply to private scholarship programs, right? We have federal grant programs, we have federal loan programs, with Stafford, Pell, and all that, but we don't have federal scholarship programs. So if you are a scholar, you have to go to a private institution to get funding to advance your scholarly pursuits, right? That is a missed opportunity. That's not the case in most of the developed world. That our top scholars could essentially not end up being able to go to college, right? Because they have to go to some private institution to get a scholarship. That's crazy, right? So first thing is that we should literally have, and again, by defunding the Department of Education, I'm not saying the Department of Education was doing the greatest job. I mean, most of the federal government organizations right now are doing really bad in the audits. The Department of Defense is the worst of all. Like they haven't passed the audit in 5 years, so then that is what that is. But I do think that we should have scholarship programs that are for advancing our own in-country talent, that are separate from the loan programs and then the need-based Pell Grant program, that are strictly based on our meritocracy, top performers getting an opportunity to go to college and to excel and to drive the new next levels of innovation, to clean up our environmental issues, to balance our budgets and do all the things that we need these young people and really talented people to do. So that would service a certain portion, right, of that middle class and that lower income and the upper income area, right? So that serves a certain portion. The second thing is that, we do have programs in place through the military, right? So we have I forget what it's called, I forget, but it's basically like service in military, and then there's the ability for people to attend college through that. So that is another mechanism that exists. The only problem is that, again, with a lot of young people, they don't want to go to war, and when we have all these looming wars, kids are like, I just want to get education. I don't want to end up having to go to war. But I do think we need to talk more about those programs too, because as you can see, like when I was a kid, there was commercials all the time about opportunities that you join the military that you could actually have your college paid for. I don't know, those commercials have gone away. We don't talk about that anymore. And military enrollment is actually down as well. So we can see that there's a correlation between, just actually presenting the opportunities and people actually enrolling in the opportunities. Second tier. And then there's the third tier, to do with loan programs and with the grant programs. First of all, the Pell Grant program, even when I was in school, and I'm almost 50, so that was a long time ago. The Pell Grant program barely covered, didn't cover much of my college tuition. I think my Pell Grant was like $800 or something a year. I mean, my books were $800. So some of my books were even more than that. I think I had one book that was $600 at the time, right? So we got to increase that Pell Grant program and make it more beneficial to people, because it doesn't cover enough. You got people who have a Pell Grant and a Stafford loan and still are getting a bill. I mean, that's crazy. The program is not meeting the requirements that it should. I also think that we have lottery programs that fund public schools. I think we should expand those programs to also cover public university expenses and use that to partially fund some of these scholarship programs that we need so desperately. And then the last thing I would say is we obviously have a shortage of teachers, especially here in Shelby County and across many parts of Tennessee. And that we should have some incentives based on people who go into education fields that can get some additional funding through grants or through scholarship assistance. And then the final thing is that there's also within the federal portfolio of funding options, there are obviously the student loan assistance programs, but only the Stafford is a fixed interest program. They've got a lot of variable interest programs, which basically put kids into these floating interest rate programs, which can cause their student loan debt to balloon, especially right now with the hyperinflation and escalating interest rates. I think that all federal programs should be fixed rate programs. We should eliminate those variable interest rate programs. Those are really bad, both for education and for home ownership as well, regardless of credit score.
Yeah, I think that would be a great start. What do you think of because when I was in high school, there was a dual credit program where kids could go to the community college and get a lot of their associate's credits while they were juniors and seniors in high school. And then there's also towns in a lot of different states where community college is free. Your associate's degree is free as long as you go live in that area and go to that college. What do you think about expanding some of those kind of programs as well?
Yeah. I love. Matter of fact, honestly, in a lot of communities, you could actually self-fund that, through your own tax base, and wouldn't even need federal assistance to do it. I mean, in Memphis, we're almost a self-funded city. Like we don't get a huge amount of federal or state assistance in Memphis. Most of our programs are self-funded. So so like something like that, you could probably in a lot of communities you could probably self-fund those types of programs. So yeah, I think that's a big incubator. I did a program like that when I was in high school in Illinois, where I went and took electronics classes in the morning, and then I went to the high school, after first period, and that really helped me when I went to school to be an electrical engineer, and I already had that like electronics background from my high school slash. A shout out to MCC, Metropolitan Community College, and that really helped me a lot. So I think those programs are really valuable. I think those are really valid. Some schools have beautician, training within those types of programs. Some have welder training, which is a really good career if you can get that kind of work. That welding is a very high paid career. We had auto mechanics when I was in high school, and we had people who were graduating and they were matriculating directly into the trade schools. They only had 1 year left because they'd already completed all their core classes. So those are all great opportunities where we can help. And the truth is that if we roll that money as part of the public school funding, so like basically like a portion of the public school funding goes to community college, and we utilize those public funds to do that, it actually could be, it might not actually require additional budget funding for the schools to do it if we structure it the right way and we make the right deals with our community college system. But again, nothing is just curriculum. It's making sure that we are structuring, even in the community college world, structuring the curriculum for things that we actually need in society, so that when the kids come out, they actually can find jobs because they're in high demand industries. That's the other part that we don't talk about. Is again, does the curriculum match the need? Because we're you look at even in the 90s and 2000s, where we were importing in talent because we didn't have enough engineers. We were importing engineers from India and from other parts of the world to fill the void, in parts of Asia, and China and other places, to fill the void of engineering. We also had the same thing with doctors, where we didn't have enough doctors at one point. We were importing people in because we could not develop enough doctors of our own within our own country. So, it's not just, what comes with a lot of these universities are kind of corporate institutions. They're for profit in a lot of ways. It gets overlooked. Like, do we have the right curriculum to drive the workforce for the needs that we have within our own states? And I don't think that there's I haven't heard one time, again, this is no offense to Bill Lee. I don't know Bill Lee, but I'm saying as our governor, I've never heard him once talk about, are we structuring these publicly funded institutions to deliver the type of workers that we need in our economies? Because that guarantees them work, that guarantees them high pay, and it guarantees that in our societies that we have the service providers and the right technicians that we need to continue to grow our economies and to support the needs of our constituents.
Absolutely. Okay. We did have a couple questions in the chat that I missed. Give me 1 second. Okay, so the first one, do you have a goal of how many bills you would like to sponsor in your first year?
Yeah, so this is a great question. As an independent, the opportunity to bring, so there's a whole rule system and hierarchy to how you actually get a bill to the Senate floor, and it's really driven through your political party, because again, the Senate Majority Leader is going to in a lot of ways determine what hits the docket for Senate when it's in session, and if the majority, obviously right now the Republicans control the Senate. But I can switch to Democrats in the midterms. But either way, I have to work through their system to get anything, including bills, to reach the Senate floor for a conversation or a vote. So that actually relates to who I caucus with when elected. So you have the option: you can either caucus with the Republicans, or you can caucus with the Democrats when you are elected, or you can not caucus with anyone. I've never seen an independent who didn't caucus with anyone before. So all the independents today who are in the Senate caucus either Republican or caucus Democrat. Again, so today I'm going to say which way I would go. My parents, I have one parent who's a Republican, one parent who's a Democrat. So I'm literally a true independent. but I think it depends on what the needs of Tennessee are. If the bills that are gonna have the most impact on Tennessee are being proposed or being sponsored by one of the two parties, I will caucus with the party who is sponsoring the bills that are going to be most impactful to my constituency, because I am hired to represent the people of Tennessee. So I've got to make sure that the people of Tennessee are getting the things that they need. And so I don't have any party loyalty. My only loyalty is to the people of Tennessee, and I'll make whatever moves I need to make sure that that the bills that are going to benefit my people are going to be prioritized.
All right, perfect. And another question from some veterans in the chat: what veterans issues do you support, and which are you against?
Yeah. Well, I would say, let me frame another way, because there's obviously this could go a lot of different directions. I think maybe tailor the question and focus the question a little bit so I can make sure I answer your question specifically. So is there something that you are passionate about? And I can tell you my position on those areas. But if we kind of cover the whole gamut of all veteran issues, we might go down a rabbit hole. So I'll ask you, if you wouldn't mind, could you clarify the question a little bit so I can make sure that I answer your question precisely and with detail?
Okay, yeah. If they're still in here, who asked that? It was originally Mitch the vet. Mitch the vet, if you're still in here, if you could just clarify your question, like what issues are you? He just wants to know which issues you're supportive of and which are you opposed to.
Okay. So
you could just list a few, like if it's like you feel like it's too much.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think the first, I guess the primary issues that at least that I come in contact with. Now, keep in mind that I'm from a family of a lot of veterans. I actually was in the Air National Guard, 164th Airlift Wing. Shout out to everybody there, out of Memphis. And both my grandfathers are my mother's father was Navy CB, World War II, South Pacific. My father's father was Army Air Force, World War II, and he was actually was not a deployed soldier. He was actually on the basketball team. They actually traveled around the different bases and they played basketball games to improve the morale of the troops. And then I've got lots of cousins and uncles and so forth served in Vietnam and in other conflicts. I also was at CNN, and I covered the second Gulf War for CNN. So again, strong background in military and a lot of veterans in my family. But so for me, there's a couple of primary things. Always healthcare post deployment. So that's a big. Now I wouldn't say it's an issue, but it's an area where we have to ensure that we have proper funding, we have proper support. Secondarily, is the DOJ. We got to have stronger audit controls. Again, not DOJ, but DOD, Department of Defense, has failed 5 straight audits. There's like $500 billion of unreconciled spending. And that's important because when we think about things like GI Bill, we think about other programs that need to be funded. If money is disappearing, then we could have shortcomings, bases being closed, things like that, when it might not be necessary because we do have the money. And so so number one is going to be mental health. Number 2 will be financial controls and better governance and audit reliability, so we can ensure that we're not going out and closing a base for financial purposes when we literally have lost $500 billion. All right. So that's would be my secondary. And then third would be, again, like the low enrollment, right? We have one of the lowest enrollment periods in U.S. history in terms of young people joining the military. And so I think there's an opportunity that we can bolster that. And then with that come things like the veteran grants and home ownership and GI Bill for education, all those things that come along with that improve our society, improve the cost, reduce the cost of education for a lot of people who are in situations where they may not be able to afford to go to school, and then secondarily help people to actually be able to afford homes while also ensuring the defense of our country.
All right. Well, sounds good to me, Mitch. I hope that answered your question at least a little bit. Let's see.
And there's one other thing too, and know some people may not like this, but this is something I'm hard heavy about. Is so one of the things that people don't understand, that may not realize, that some of the new standards for grooming in the military, that they're requiring that Black soldiers have to shave down to the skin. There's a skin condition that the majority of Black men actually have, that actually we cannot shave to the skin on a daily basis. It actually creates, we call it ingrown hairs, but it's, even from a scientific standpoint, it's actually even more serious than that, because that creates infections and that can actually create skin illnesses for African American soldiers. So I'm absolutely against that. I don't think that, like, for some people it's a hygiene issue. Like, if you don't shave, you can get lice or ticks and things like that. But that's not something that directly impacts Black people. So when we talk about deploying healthcare standards in the military, we need to identify that biologically there are some differences between individuals based upon their genetics, and that you can't just do a kind of one size fits all approach or something like that, because what actually helps one person to maintain hygiene actually could have the absolute opposite effect on another group of people. And we need to be a little more cognizant of some of the requirements that are being placed on people from a healthcare, grooming, biological standpoint, that actually could make it, could put people in harm's way, especially when they're deployed into adverse situations, and they're trying to uphold these superimposed standards. So that's something that I do also feel is something we need to address, because it does have a material impact on the morale of soldiers and also on their hygiene.
Absolutely, I agree. Okay, so moving on to some economy questions. So housing prices, of course, are rising faster than wages. What is your plan to make housing affordable for Tennesseans? I know you touched a little bit earlier on the loan situation, the interest rates. Do you have any other ideas on what we can do to lower the cost of housing?
Yeah. So it is another thing right now, that the first time buyer, the age of first time buyer is 10 years older than it was 20 years ago, right? And so people were buying their first house around mid 30s. Now people are buying their first house around mid 40s, and that is crazy. That's the majority of people for first time home buyers. So we have first time home buyer programs, but wages, the cost of living is outpacing wage growth, and that's driven by a lot of things. It's driven by, again, we have a lot of corporations are being kind of unregulated and unchecked in terms from a pricing standpoint. We have high tariffs that basically U.S. citizens pay the majority of all the tariff impact. Is not impacting China or other countries. It's impacting you and I. So that creates a kind of an affordability crisis. But there's a couple things. So when we talk about the home pricing, there's things that actually drive up home pricing. One is the availability of homes in the marketplace. So we have a lot of corporations in the United States and outside the United States. Here in Tennessee, there's a lot of people who are buying houses, Tennessee houses, that are in the Middle East, and they're buying up large swaths of houses, sometimes 100, 250 houses within their portfolio, and they don't even live in the country. So you can't do that. You can't go in China and buy a bunch of houses and live in another country. They won't allow it, which is one of the reasons why they're not dealing with this affordability crisis that we're dealing with in the same way, because you can't do that. It's that they regulate that, and they make it nearly impossible for you to be an outside buyer of a home in China. And the same thing applies in Japan. You can't just go in there and buy 50 houses. They would not allow that to happen. We need to do the same thing. And because when you do that, when you have one owner and they've got corporations got 250 houses in Memphis, those houses are no longer on the market. So that creates a constraint in the amount of inventory. And when there's a constraint on inventory, supply and demand, right? Demand's high, prices go up. And you compound that with rising interest rates. And also when you take things like oil, and you got the crisis in Iran, and all oil-based products are more expensive. That means things like, coatings and, plastics and other oil-based manufactured products become more expensive, and that also impacts building materials. So when you got all that going on at the same time, it's kind of like the perfect storm of high cost of building materials, high cost of labor after post COVID-19, high interest rates, and a lack of inventory. The result's going to be higher prices. So we need to confront all four things simultaneously. So one, the Iran conflict, this is another contentious topic. Some people think, let's go in and teach the Iranians a lesson or whatever, and all that kinds of stuff. But if you understand the history of Iran, and understand like our intervention in Iran over the last 30 years, a lot of the problems in Iran were actually caused by the United States. And again, some people are going to argue it. They may not understand the history, but trust me, I've studied it, researched it, and I've been there. So the combination of study, research, and being there gives me a little bit of a little bit more knowledge than maybe the average person. But yeah, we intervened. We created the system that brings the Ayatollah and other people into power, and creates this kind of theocratical, militaristic dictatorship that ends up manifesting itself in the region. But if you go back to like 1960, 1970, Iran was a liberal country. The women were among the highest educated women in the world in Iran, and we, along with other allies, initiated regime change in their country, and the result of that regime change was a dictatorship, which is not the first time that's happened. It's happened to multiple countries due to U.S. and British, French, and other intervention. So again, I don't want to argue with you. I won't fight with you. I just incline you to read the history and understand the history, and then you'll understand what I'm talking about. So with that being said, that crisis, actually 20% of all oil in the world goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And that when that strait is constrained or when it is blockaded, it results in increased costs for lots of things. All plastic products are oil-based, right? A lot of our containers, packaging, a lot of tools. You get your power drill. It's made of the coating. The outside is maybe metal in the inside, but the outside is made of plastic. So everything that we do, the case for your toolbox, the toolbox on the back of your truck, the tires on your truck, everything. Those are all oil-based products. And so when the cost goes up, the cost goes up. And so we have to address that situation. We have to create a peaceful resolution to that situation in Iran, because it's not just impacting that, it's also impacting your energy costs. Not as much in the U.S. because we generate a lot of natural gas. So we use natural gas to generate electricity here. So we're not impacted as much because we have so much natural gas in the U.S. But across the world, it actually is raising costs quite a bit. But for fuel for your vehicle, if you're running a business, if you're a construction company, you got a bunch of F-150s, and you're filling them up with gas every day, and you're spending $200 to fill your gas tank up, that's material to your cost of running your business. That hits your COGS line, and it's going to impact the cost that you have to charge for the house that you build, because you have all these other incurred costs in the building process. And that just gets cascaded across every person who touches it, from the realtor to the broker to everybody who touches that house, including the bank, are all going to have to charge a little bit of a higher rate because of the incurred costs that they're experiencing. And so that raises the price. So that has to be addressed. So let's talk, that's the one piece. The second piece we talked about was interest rates, right? And monitoring interest rates has to do, this is a banking thing. This is a treasury thing. And so when you think about our Federal Reserve Bank, they don't give money to the United States government. They sell money to the United States government, right? So the interest rate is basically how much does it cost to buy a dollar from the Federal Reserve Bank. So when they loan money to the United States government, they are doing it at a certain interest rate, and that's the interest rate. That's the base interest rate for all loans that succeed that initial granting of currency to the federal government. So as a result of that, when we have a high base rate, then all the other bank rates are adding to that, and which is what's causing this escalating rates. Now, Trump wants to actually reduce the interest rate because he wants more people to borrow money, which stimulates the economy and creates business opportunities and allows people to buy houses and buy more infrastructure and so on and so forth. But the problem with that is that the Federal Reserve is worried that if they reduce the interest rates and people start spending, it won't be regular people spending. It'll be big corporations spending. It'll be the Elon Musk of the world and the Jeff Bezos of the world and all those guys. And it'll create even more inflation in the marketplace, because when people are spending lots of money and wages aren't increasing, it actually makes things become more expensive, because other companies say, well, if I can sell it at $5.25 versus $5, I'll sell it at $5.25 because I'm seeing that in the marketplace, people will buy it. May not be you buying it, but if Amazon makes a purchase, they're buying 1,000 of something at a time. When Amazon buys cars, their fleet has 100,000 vehicles in it. So they're buying 10,000 vehicles at a time. So if you're General Motors and you're selling cars and you're seeing, well, we sold 10,000 more vehicles this year, they may not necessarily know where that all those purchases are coming from. But the federal government, Amazon, and other parties like that are the biggest buyers. So they can actually move the needle on corporate revenue simply by making one purchase order. You may not be doing better, but that corporation says, I'm doing better, so I think that the economy is better. And so they want to reduce interest rates. But sometimes there are situations where actually it benefits the country to actually raise interest rates. And it's not popular. Powell, who just left the Federal Reserve or left Treasury, he was facing a lot of pressure. But if you don't understand macroeconomics, you may not understand that sometimes you have to raise interest rates to actually slow inflation and to put some controls in place on spending. And so we're in that situation right now. It's really bad for home buyers. It's really bad for car buyers. But it does slow some of the corporate and the federal government purchasing, which actually helps to stabilize pricing. So my thought is not to tell the economists how to do their job, but to reduce the tariffs. Because if we reduce the tariffs, it has a material impact on how much things cost in the marketplace, which actually gives you more buying power and makes your dollar stretch further without actually having to mess with the interest rates. Interest rates will come down on their own as long as inflation stalls. But if we try to manufacture or to manipulate the interest rates and bring the interest rates down too far, you actually increase you actually cause more inflation and make your day-to-day buying activities, grocery shopping, and things like that actually more expensive. And so we got to be a little bit careful about that.
Absolutely. There's a question in the chat. How will you move the needle? How will you motivate action within the Senate?
Yeah, so the power that I have as independent is the power of the swing vote. So today, we're anticipating that in the midterms that there'll be a lot more parity in the Senate. So maybe a 51-49, 52-48 split, which will make the swing voters actually extremely powerful in the Senate. Because if you want to get that, get a simple for things that require a simple majority vote, it may be one or two votes that actually determine if a bill gets passed or not passed. So if you're that one last voter, those two last votes, myself, Bernie Sanders and several other independents, that empowers us to be able to be kind of that final vote. So I would basically hold my vote on most of those important bills that do require a simple majority, and then I would have the parties come to me and negotiate in the best interest of the people of Tennessee and in the best interest of the citizens of the United States, to try to utilize that leverage to drive more ethical, more morally aligned decision making and bill structure.
Okay. Apparently, I'm sorry, I read it wrong. So we have a Senate right now that is not producing for this country. So how will you motivate action in a Senate that is not producing for the country?
Yeah, this is just a byproduct of obviously we have a majority both Senate and the House under Republican control at this point. And again, it's not a knock on Republican versus Democrat or anything like that. But what it is that the Republican leadership today under Trump, I'm not sure that Trump is actually really a Republican. If you think about Republican values, like the religious right and small government and all these different things that are typical of the traditional Republican Party, I'm not sure that he's really a Republican. So for some of you guys who are Republicans, I think there's like difference of like the maybe the Tea Party Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, and then the traditional Republicans, which I think are really three different parties, all sitting under the same umbrella. I think the same exists within the Democratic Party. I think that like the Democrats, like my mom's a Democrat, is like the Christian, Southern Baptist Democrats who are about, about family and about religious values and about taking care of your neighbor and caring for your environment and caring for your community and working across race and unity across the country. But that's a little bit different than what you call a modern liberal. Right. And that's also going to be different than you call a centralist Democrat, which kind of like a Bill Clinton, who was like more of a centralist. Right. So there are within the parties, there are kind of like parties within the parties, and they're not so it's not a monolith. And that's what causes the gridlock that happens within the Senate today, is that you've got, even among the Republicans, there's not a complete agreement in how they want to work. And so a lot of bills don't get passed because it's not just the Republicans and Democrats, it's division within the Republican Party. You see like people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, basically like criticizing the Republican Party. You see people like Candace Owens criticizing the Republican Party, right? You're seeing people like Tucker Carlson criticizing the Republican Party because it's not the traditional Republican Party that they kind of signed up into. But on the same token, you see the same thing with the Democrats. You see people like Bernie Sanders going independent, who has been a lifelong Democrat, right? And so we're seeing all this happening kind of in real time. And so that's what's causing the gridlock. So how do you get beyond that, right? Which is the question. And to get beyond it, there's a couple things you have to do. One thing is that you have to build political power outside of the party structure with like-minded individuals. So we've seen that happen, like where you have Democratic leaders or Republican leaders who are very much aligned with people on the other side of the aisle who have just the same values. We saw like Colin Powell, for example, was a Republican, but he was very highly favored among Democrats. He has very high favorability among Democrats. We saw the same thing with like partnership with George Herbert Walker Bush, or is that the younger George Bush, and Obama, right? That even in their transition of power, they had a really clean transition of power. That they had full disclosure of all of the documents and information for the Obama campaign, which allowed Obama to actually hit the ground running immediately and not have to deal with a lot of the minutiae that people deal with in the transition of power. And again, I'm not saying that I'm not who's a fan of who's not a fan of who. I'm just saying that there's a certain amount of benefit when you can actually work across the aisle. And I think for me, the benefit is that I'm not waving a flag and saying you got to be a Democrat, you got to be a Republican. I'm saying that like I'm looking for like-minded people. I'm looking for people who actually care about our constituency across the country. I think who care about children, who are not going to separate families at the border and put the children in one place and the mom somewhere else, because that creates a type of trauma that we can't heal through government politics, right? And it's unnecessary. It doesn't provide any material benefit. I think that we should have people who care about economics. That if you have organizations in the government and they're failing audits, that this should not be like just a short news blurb. That should be headline news. Why we care more about Klay Thompson and Megan Thee Stallion than we care about the Department of Defense, having an audit and failing to the tune of losing $500 billion. Why is that not a bigger news story? I don't understand that. I think that when we talk about tariffs that are disenfranchising many people throughout our country, Republican and Democrat, why is that not a bigger issue? I don't understand that. And so, my thought is not so much to try to paint the party lines. My intent is to go in and I already have a list of people who I'm willing to work with who are in the Senate today, who I think are open-minded, who are fact-based and fact-driven, and who have high ethics and high morals. And I don't want them to change parties. I'm not trying to get them to jump across the aisle. What I'm trying to get them to do is to vote in the interest of their constituency, the people who they've made a vow to represent in the Senate. And if they won't do that, then I will just publish that I reached out to them, what I tried to get them to do, how it benefits their constituency in their state or in the state of Tennessee. And then you can decide for yourself if you want to vote them back in again. So there's a form of accountability. Part of it is the accountability of conjecture, which is me having a conversation, and then secondarily is the accountability of utilizing my voice in the media to expose what people will not do the things that are in the best interest of their constituency, and would instead either follow the party line or follow the money.
Okay. We're coming up on our time here, but I do have a few more questions from the chat. First one, what are your plans to fight the MAGA ideology, especially being an independent?
Yeah. Again, one thing is that, we're in a country that we've gone through a lot of iterations of different ideologies. And I don't think you can't make a person not be a racist. You can't make a person, be a different religion, right? You can't make a person have join a different political party. That's just not realistic. What I can do is control what's within my domain of control. And that means, open, honest, and transparent communication. I think what happens right now is a lot of things happen through backdoor deals. People in the country don't know what's happening. They're not privy to the information of what deals are being made behind closed doors and how that affects their community. The difference between me is that I'm open and transparent. So if someone comes to me with a deal and I think it's a bad deal, and they want to apply some type of pressure or political pressure or whatever, I would just disclose it. I'm a journalist by nature. I worked for CBS, I worked for CNN, I covered 9/11, I covered the Second Gulf War. I have no problem with, just making it a conversation piece. Yeah, they brought me a deal. It's a bad deal. This is why I didn't do it, Tennessee. This is why I didn't do it, United States. Here's what I would like the deal to look like. If it looks like this, I'll endorse it, and then I'll let the public decide. Was that the right decision for Tennessee, or was it the wrong decision? Right. That's the difference between me and these other candidates, is that the candidates, they're doing things behind closed doors. You don't even know that in a year you're gonna run into economic hardship because someone signed off on a trade deal that actually hurts your community. Because you're not gonna sit all day and watch C-SPAN. I wouldn't expect you to do that. I think some party day you should be able to watch some Netflix or watch the game or whatever it is. But somebody's got to be there to hold the front line and say, hey, I know the media won't cover this, because if they do, Trump might get them fired. But I'll cover it because I'm not afraid, and because I signed up for this. I signed up to represent you. So, the threats aren't going to impact me. I'm from East St. Louis. I've dealt with threats my whole life. I'm built for it. So I can be honest and transparent, and I can talk about the things that actually matter, and give you a kind of a front row seat to what's happening behind closed doors that you don't get today. And that's a big difference in what you're dealing with today from a political landscape.
All right. Well, perfect. And then how can we be sure you keep your personal feelings out of votes and vote for the people of Tennessee?
Yeah, again, I work right now. I'm senior director for a Fortune 500 company, a corporate leader. I have a global team supporting everything from HR, facilities, real estate, security, global energy. I've got our vehicle fleets. I've got global travel and meetings. I've got medical consulting and medical services. So we manage all of our consultants, even the lobbyists that are in Capitol Hill. That goes through my organization as well. So, as a corporate entity, I can't do everything that I like or what I want to do. There are times I have to. The majority of my job is doing what's going to be best for the company as a whole, all of our 55,000 employees globally, and what's going to be best for our shareholders. So, 25 years in corporate leadership. 10 years as a pastor, that's just not the way I'm wired, or the way I was brought up. My dad's a preacher, my granddad's a pastor and bishop. So, the way we were raised is to do what's going to be best for your congregation, do what's going to be best for your community, and in this case, do what's going to be best for the state of Tennessee and the United States of America. And so that's how I'm wired. That's what I've done for the last 25 years. I've got a long track record of success. Not only that, but I also was a leader for 2 nonprofits. I was on the Apex board of directors for the Mid-South Minority Business Continuum Consortium, and also for a nonprofit called Victims to Victory, which was a nonprofit that supported families who lost loved ones to gun violence. So again, in every aspect, I'm a community guy, try to do what's right and do what's best for the people who rely upon me and who I've made a commitment to support.
All right. Thank you for that, James. And before we go, I really enjoyed talking to you tonight. It was a pleasure. What is your final word or your final message for voters as we head towards Election Day?
Yeah, I would say this. First of all, do your best, do your research. If you'd like to connect with me, again, my name is James Macon. That's Macon. You can find me on all the social media platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. So feel free to reach out, connect to my page. You can always send me a message. Ask anybody who sent me a message. I respond to all the messages. I don't have a staff. I am running a non-fundraising campaign. One of the biggest actually losses of income and of transfers of wealth in the United States is actually political campaigns. So I'm not raising any money for my campaign. I'm traveling across the whole state of Tennessee on my own dime. I have a threshold that I can't go above $5,000, or otherwise I have to do a bunch of audit stuff. So I've built my whole campaign with a budget. I'm going to travel the entire state of Tennessee, host the town halls, which I've already done 3. And I will not spend more than $5,000 to do it. Because if I'm telling you guys to be fiscally responsible, and I'm telling the government to be fiscally responsible, it has to start with me. If I can't run this campaign for $5,000 and reach all the constituents of Tennessee in a 12-month period, then I can't tell you should be able to fund your kid going to college. You should be able to fund your small business interests. You should be able to manage your household income if I can't manage my own. So before I can be a leader of people, I've got to first have personal accountability and set an example. So non-fundraising campaign, independent candidate, representing the state of Tennessee and the United States of America. That's my final word. And thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to speak with you. And if you would like me to come out and speak to your organization, you can feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email at jameswmaconiii@hotmail.com, jameswmaconiii@hotmail.com, or send me a message through social media, and I will come out and talk to your group, organization, church, or otherwise. Thank you very much.
All right, perfect. Big Mama, I hope that answered your question, because she just came in and said, do you meet with people? So if that's awesome. So again, your email you just gave, and what socials are you on again?
Yes, I'm on Facebook. It's James W. Macon III. James W. Macon III is what I'm on Facebook. Exact same. All my accounts are linked except for TikTok, which we're on today, and you can. I think I'm tagged in this podcast, so you can actually just connect to the tag there and just send me a message, and I can respond there. You can see I've got videos with my campaign platform and information about the campaign that you can actually watch. I also got some animations on my Facebook page to help people understand what does a U.S. Senator do? How should you hold your senators accountable? And all that kinds of stuff. So if you're, I got a lot of friends who are like, man, I like to read, but I love you just made a video. And I've even had people say, can you just make it an animation? So I've done both. So check it out. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. Well, Bobby, we do also want to invite you to our next event, which is tomorrow. We're going to be interviewing Jonathan Harris. He's running for Florida's U.S. Congressional District in District 16. I'm sorry, U.S. Congressional seat in District 16. So that's tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And other than that, we appreciate you being here with us tonight. Again, our Vote Counts is a nonpartisan movement uniting Americans from all walks of life to empower voters, support candidates of integrity, and ensure every voice is heard. Through education, outreach, accountability, and action, we're building a stronger democracy, one informed vote at a time. Thank you so much to everybody, and everyone have a good night.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Bye.